The sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of the spacious kitchen, glinting off the chrome surfaces of the appliances. Isabella Montenegro methodically sliced fresh fruit for the morning smoothie she'd made for herself every morning for 15 years. Her precise, practiced surgeon's movements never lost their professional clarity, even in simple household actions. Mauricio, her husband, sat at his desk, staring at the screen of his phone, only occasionally sipping cool coffee from his favorite mug. The morning silence, once cozy and conducive to leisurely conversation, now seemed like a taut string ready to burst at the slightest touch. "Important meeting with potential clients today," Mauricio said without lifting his eyes from the phone. "I may be staying late." Isabella nodded, pouring the chopped fruit into the glass of the blender. She'd learned not to ask unnecessary questions about his work. Lately, any conversation about business had turned into a monologue about the difficulties of the real estate market and ungrateful clients. Suddenly the silence was cut by the ringing of the phone. Isabella wiped her hands and glanced at the screen. It was Sebastian, her younger brother and partner in the clinic, calling. "Good morning, Sebastian," she replied, trying to speak softly so as not to disturb her husband. "Bella, come to the clinic right away." Her brother's voice sounded agitated. "We have Consuelo Velasquez admitted." Isabella froze for a second. The mayor's wife wasn't just an important patient. Her condition could affect the reputation of the clinic she and her brother had inherited from their father. "What's wrong with her?" Isabella was already heading toward the kitchen exit, mentally compiling a list of necessary actions. "Severe abdominal pain, high fever. I've scheduled initial tests, but she insists on consulting with you personally." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Isabella ended the conversation and turned to her husband. "I have to go right away. There's an emergency at the clinic." Mauricio only shrugged, not taking his eyes off the phone. "Sure, go. It's always like that with you. The clinic comes first." Isabella swallowed the barbed reply that was about to roll off her tongue. Now was not the time to get into an argument. She went quickly upstairs to her bedroom, running through the possible diagnoses and necessary tests in her head as she went. Their bedroom, decorated in calm beige tones, held traces of their once happy life together. Travel photos on the walls, twin bedside tables, a spacious walk-in closet where the couple's belongings were still stored together. Isabella quickly changed into the austere suit she preferred to wear to work. Her movements were honed by years of morning preparations: natural-colored lipstick, pearl earrings, minimal jewelry, and comfortable shoes with low heels. Walking down the stairs of their two-story house in an upscale neighborhood, Isabella remembered how she and Mauricio had chosen this house. Back then, 12 years ago, they had both been enthusiastic and full of plans for the future. Mauricio had just opened his real estate agency. She was actively developing a clinic with her brother. They dreamed of a big family, of children running around the spacious rooms. The children never came. First, they were both too busy with their careers. Then health problems began. Then, endless courses of treatment which did not bring results. Maybe that was when something snapped in their relationship. Isabella took the keys to her silver Mercedes in the garage. This car was her little pride. She had bought it with her own money earned at the clinic. It was the first time Mauricio showed signs of dissatisfaction with her success, though he tried to hide it behind strained congratulations. Driving out, Isabella turned on the navigator, even though she knew the way to the clinic. It had become another habit, listening to the calm voice dictating turns to fill the silence in the car. She and Mauricio had often driven together before, but now each preferred to travel separately. The morning city was slowly waking up. Vendors lifted the shutters of small stores. Waiters set up the tables of sidewalk cafes, and people hurrying to work crossed the streets. Isabella caught herself thinking that she couldn't remember the last time she and her husband had had breakfast at one of these cafes, enjoying the morning chill and fresh pastries. Parking in her usual spot outside the clinic, Isabella lingered in the car for a moment, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror. No matter the circumstances, she always tried to look impeccable. Her father had taught her and Sebastian from childhood that a doctor's appearance was as important as his professionalism. The Montenegro Clinic was a modern building of glass and light-colored stone. Every morning, Isabella looked at it and had mixed feelings. Pride in the work her father had created and successfully continued with her brother, and a slight sadness at the memory of how her father had led her as a little girl by the hand through the corridors, introducing her to the staff and patients. Sebastian was already waiting for her at the entrance, a tall, trim man of about 38, impeccably dressed as always in an expensive suit. Outwardly, they were very much alike, the same dark hair, the correct facial features inherited from his mother, and his father's keen, attentive gaze. "Consuelo is in room 3 of the suite," he announced, handing the sister a clipboard with the results of the preliminary tests. "I've ordered an operating room to be prepped if necessary." Isabella nodded, reviewing the data as she went. Her mind had already shifted completely to work, leaving domestic concerns somewhere far outside the clinic. Here, she wasn't just Isabella, she was Dr. Montenegro, and now she was going to have to live up to that name. The Montenegro Clinic greeted Isabella with the usual atmosphere of businesslike bustle. Nurses moved swiftly and silently through the corridors, bringing out the necessary equipment and medicines. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the expensive carpeting, specially chosen by his father to maximize patient comfort. Sebastian walked beside his sister, reporting the situation as he went. Temperature 39.5, right subcostal pain, nausea. Preliminary blood tests show elevated white blood cells. Isabella surveyed the interiors of the clinic, familiar to the smallest detail with a professional eye. Every painting, every decorative element had been carefully selected by their father, Alberto Montenegro, who had created this place over 30 years. 5 years ago, shortly before his untimely death, he gathered them in his office and officially handed over the running of the clinic to his children. "You will continue my business," he said then. "Sebastian, you have inherited my business acumen. Isabella, you have my talent as a doctor. Together you can take the clinic to the next level." Since then, they have truly excelled. The Montenegro Clinic has become one of the most prestigious medical facilities in the city. They introduced the latest equipment, invited the best specialists, and expanded the range of services. Now the city's elite, including the mayor's family, were treated here. Isabella entered the room where Consuelo Velázquez was. The spacious room was furnished like a 5-star hotel room, upholstered furniture, a flat-screen television, a private bathroom. Only the medical equipment reminded her that this was a hospital room. Consuelo lay on the bed, her swarthy face contorted with pain. Despite her malaise, she tried to raise herself at the sight of the doctors entering. "Dr. Montenegro, how good of you to come." The patient's voice sounded weak, but there was relief in it. Isabella approached the bed, putting on her gloves with a professional motion. "Señora Velázquez, can you tell me when the pain started?" Isabella spent the next 15 minutes carefully examining the patient, asking clarifying questions and making notes in the medical chart. Her touch was confident and cautious at the same time. Years of practice had taught her to find the balance between professionalism and concern for the patient's comfort. "Looks like acute cholecystitis," she told her brother as she stepped out into the hallway. "We need an urgent ultrasound and more blood tests. If it's confirmed, we'll prepare for surgery." Sebastian nodded and immediately gave the necessary orders to the staff. He and his sister had long ago learned to work as a single mechanism. He was in charge of organizational issues. She was in charge of treatment. This division of duties suited both of them. An hour later, all the necessary tests were done, and the diagnosis was confirmed. Isabella was just finishing explaining the treatment plan to Consuelo when Ramon Velasquez, the mayor of the city, literally flew into the room. His usually impeccable appearance was now slightly disheveled. His tie was askew and his eyes were filled with genuine concern. "Consuelo, darling," he rushed to his wife, forgetting to say hello to the doctors. "What's the matter? Why didn't you call me at once?" "I didn't want to distract you from an important appointment," Consuelo smiled weakly. Isabella tactfully stepped aside, giving the couple a moment to be alone. Sebastian, meanwhile, coughed delicately, drawing the mayor's attention. "Señor Velasquez, allow me to explain the situation." Isabella watched her brother calmly and confidently tell the mayor about his wife's condition, skillfully balancing medical terms with clear explanations. At times like this, she especially appreciated his ability to connect with people. She herself preferred working with patients rather than their relatives. "Surgery is necessary," she entered the conversation when it came to treatment, "but the risk is minimal, especially since we identified the problem early." For the next 2 days, Isabella hardly left the clinic. The surgery had been a success, and she was now personally monitoring her patient's recovery. Consuelo was recovering surprisingly quickly, perhaps because she was getting the best attention from the clinic staff. The mayor appeared every day, always with huge bouquets of flowers, which gradually filled the entire ward. On the 3rd day, when it was obvious that his wife was completely out of danger, he invited Isabella and Sebastian into his office to talk. "I want to express my sincere gratitude to you," he began as they settled into the comfortable leather chairs. "Your professionalism and care for your patients is worthy of the highest praise." Sebastian smiled politely. "We're just doing our job, Señor Velasquez." No, you do much more than that." The mayor raised his hand, stopping the objections. "And I'd like to discuss the possibility of working more closely together. Our city hospital is in need of modernization, and your expertise would be invaluable in this project." Mauricio took a sip. "Of course, since you always do great things. The clinic is thriving. The mayor of the city thanks you personally. It doesn't matter that other people are not doing so well, does it?" Isabella felt the muscles in her neck tense. She was well aware that her husband was talking about his real estate agency, which had fallen on hard times in recent months. "Mauricio, let's not—" "Yes, of course, let's not." He set his glass down abruptly on the table. "You're tired after your triumphant day, aren't you? I'm going for a walk." Isabella followed his receding figure with a glance. Evenings like this had been happening more and more often lately. She went up to her bedroom, mechanically performing the evening ritual: shower, face cream, silk pajamas. Sleep was not coming. Her mind was spinning with thoughts of the clinic, of the mayor's proposal, of her husband's strange behavior. Something was subtly changing in their lives, and she couldn't yet figure out what it was. A week had passed since the mayor's wife had been successfully treated. Isabella sat in her home office, reviewing documents on the project to modernize the city hospital. Her attention was constantly distracted by Mauricio's voice coming from the next room. He was on the phone, too quietly, too carefully, constantly lowering his voice to a whisper. These calls had become more frequent lately. Mauricio always went into the other room if the phone rang in her presence. If she entered the room while it was ringing, he would instantly change the subject or quickly say goodbye. At first, Isabella had written it off as work problems. Perhaps he didn't want to discuss the complexities of his business in front of her. "Yes, of course. No, she doesn't know. Everything will be fine, don't worry." Scraps of phrases trickled through the wall. Isabella set the paperwork aside. It was getting harder and harder to concentrate on her work. She got up from her desk and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured garden. The gardener came every weekend to keep the rose bushes and ornamental trees in perfect order. This garden was her pride. She personally chose each plant, planned the layout of the beds. Mauricio joked then that she treated the garden like an operating room. Everything had to be in its place. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn around. Mauricio was standing in the office doorway, stashing his phone in his pants pocket. "Work call?" Isabella asked, trying to keep her voice sounding casual. "Yes, a client is interested in the facility," he answered a little too quickly. "No big deal." Isabella nodded, pretending to return to the paperwork. Mauricio stood in the doorway for a few more seconds, as if he wanted to add something, but then turned and left. A minute later, the front door slammed downstairs, and he left for the office again. That evening, Isabella stayed longer than usual at the clinic. She was sitting in her office, which was one floor above her brother's, trying to concentrate on a patient's medical history. Sebastian came in without knocking, a habit they had developed as children. "You seem distracted today," he remarked, taking a seat in the chair across from her. "Is something wrong?" Isabella set aside the file folder. "Mauricio has been acting strangely lately. Constant secret phone calls, coming home late." "Maybe he really does have business problems," Sebastian suggested, but you could hear the doubt in his voice. "I thought so too at first." Isabella stood up and walked to the window of her office, which overlooked the evening city. "But this talk, he's clearly hiding something." Sebastian looked at his sister carefully. In their years together, he had learned to read her moods better than anyone else. "And how long has this been going on?" "About 3 weeks, maybe a month." Isabella ran her hand through her hair, a gesture that only appeared in moments of great anxiety. "I didn't pay much attention to it at first, but now—" "Have you asked him directly?" "I've tried, but he either avoids answering or says I'm making it up. And yesterday I overheard him telling someone on the phone, 'She doesn't know.'" Sebastian frowned. "You know, it's times like this that I wish we were doctors and not private investigators." The joke brought a faint smile to Isabella's face. "What's your advice?" "Observe him," replied her brother gravely. "Don't jump to conclusions, but pay attention. If something is really going on, sooner or later it will become obvious." Isabella nodded. Her brother's advice was sound, though the very thought of having to keep an eye on her own husband made her deeply uncomfortable. When she returned home, she found that Mauricio had not yet arrived. On the kitchen table was a note written in his sloppy handwriting. "Important meeting with a client. Don't expect me for dinner." Isabella crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. These notes were appearing more and more often. He used to always call if he was late, but now he preferred to leave short messages without going into detail. She mechanically heated up dinner for herself. She didn't want to cook for herself. She sat down at the table in the spacious kitchen, which was now unusually quiet. The television on did not help the oppressive feeling of loneliness. Mauricio returned at midnight. He smelled faintly of alcohol, but he wasn't drunk. More like he'd had a couple of drinks to keep the conversation going. His shirt was slightly wrinkled and a small sauce stain was visible on his collar. "How was the meeting?" Isabella asked, pretending to read a medical journal. "Fine," he replied briefly, heading for the stairs. "Tired. I'm going to go to bed." Isabella watched him follow, noting new details in his behavior. In the past, he had always told her about his encounters, sometimes in great detail. Now every conversation was an exchange of short phrases. The next morning, as she was getting ready for work, she noticed that Mauricio had received a message on his phone. He read it while standing in the bathroom, and his face lit up for a moment with a smile. The same smile she had once loved so much, but now saw less and less often. "Good news?" she asked, pretending to fix her makeup. The smile instantly disappeared from his face. No. Just a client confirmed an appointment." Isabella remained silent. She knew her husband too well. That smile was not meant for a normal business message. At that moment, she felt something inside her clench at the sudden realization. Perhaps the problem was far more serious than just business difficulties. That evening, she called her brother and arranged to meet him at a small cafe near the clinic. It was their special place. Here they often discussed important matters away from the prying eyes of the staff and patients. "You were right," she said, as they settled at a table in the far corner. "Something is really going on, and I don't like it at all." Sebastian listened intently to her account of her latest observations. "Bella, are you sure you're not getting yourself worked up? Maybe he's really going through a difficult period in business." "No, that's different." She shook her head. "I've known him for 15 years. When he was having business problems, he acted differently. He'd get angry, snap, but he'd always talk to me. And now he's just distant." Sebastian stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "What are you going to do?" "Just observe for now, like you advised." Isabella took a sip of the cooling tea. "But I must know the truth, whatever it is." The morning was unusually cool for this time of year. Isabella was making coffee in the kitchen when Mauricio came downstairs with a small traveling suitcase. His appearance made her freeze with the Turk in her hand. He usually gave her advance notice of his trips. "I need to go to a neighboring town," he said, avoiding a direct glance. "A promising piece of real estate has come up. I need to inspect it in person." Isabella slowly put the Turk on the stove. "For how long?" "3 days, maybe 4. He shrugged, checking something on his phone. "I'll call you when I've determined more precisely." His voice sounded too careless, too rehearsed. Isabella noted that the suitcase looked fairly new. She'd never seen it before. Her husband usually used an old leather valise they'd bought together years ago. "Why don't you cook something for the road?" she suggested, trying to sound natural. "No thanks. I'll grab a bite on the way." Mauricio glanced at his watch. "I should go. I don't want to get caught in the morning traffic." He walked over and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, a fleeting touch, like a forced formality. An unfamiliar scent emanated from him, a new perfume she hadn't noticed before. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house. Isabella stood for a few minutes, staring at the boiling coffee. Something in her husband's behavior seemed wrong, fake, like a poorly played role in an amateur performance. The day at the clinic passed in the usual bustle: consultations, rounds, a meeting with the staff about the new equipment. In the evening, when she returned home, Isabella decided to do some financial paperwork. The end of the quarter was approaching, and she needed to prepare the accounts. She went up to her office and opened the safe where she kept important papers and bank cards. She needed the card that received the income from her share in the clinic. She planned to make a large transfer to buy new medical equipment. The card was not in its usual place. Isabella methodically checked all the compartments of the safe, then her purse, her wallet. The card was nowhere to be found. She tried to remember the last time she'd used it. It seemed to be about a week ago, when she'd paid a bill at a restaurant during a business meeting. Taking out her cell phone, she dialed the bank's number. After a few minutes of waiting and the standard identification procedure, she was answered by a friendly employee. "Good evening, Senora Montenegro. How may I help you?" "Good evening. I'd like to check the latest card transactions." Isabella called out a number. "I think I left it somewhere." "Just a moment. Yes, I see your card. The last transaction was made this morning. Payment for 2 airline tickets to the Caribbean islands and a luxury hotel reservation in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic." Isabella felt her fingers squeeze the phone tighter. "I'm sorry, are you sure? I didn't make those payments." "According to our records, the transaction was made using the correct PIN." A note of concern appeared in the employee's voice. "The total amount was $12,000. Do you wish to block the card?" $12,000, 2 tickets, a deluxe hotel. Everything fell into place with ruthless clarity. Isabella mechanically wrote down the name of the hotel and the booking details the bank employee dictated to her. "Yes, please block the card. Her voice sounded surprisingly calm. Finished speaking, she walked over to the safe and checked the compartment where she and Mauricio kept their cash. The $5,000 that had been lying there as recently as yesterday was gone. Isabella sank into her chair, feeling a cold rage building up inside. All the weirdness of the last few weeks, all the suspicious phone calls, all the late returns, it all made sense. Her husband wasn't just cheating on her. He'd stolen her money to pay for a romantic trip with his mistress. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed her brother's number. Sebastian answered after the first beep. "Bella? What's wrong? Can you come over?" She tried to speak evenly. "Right now." "I'll be there in 20 minutes," he sounded worried. As she waited for her brother, scraps of memories flashed through her mind. How Mauricio had insisted she keep a spare bank card in the safe, just in case. How he'd once caught her entering the PIN and joked about her absent-mindedness. How for the past few weeks he'd taken an unusual interest in her work schedule. Sebastian had arrived even faster than promised. One look at his sister's face told him all he needed to know. "What did he do?" he asked, walking into the study. Isabella silently handed him a sheet where she had written down the details of the reservation. Sebastian looked over the notes and his face darkened with anger. "That creep," he began, but Isabella stopped him with a gesture. "Wait, that's not all." She pointed to the empty compartment of the safe. "He took the cash, $5,000. Sebastian lowered himself into the chair across from his sister. "So what are you going to do?" Isabella rose slowly and walked to the window. Ornamental lanterns flickered in the darkness of the garden, another detail of their supposedly perfect family life. "I'm flying to Punta Cana," her voice sounded determined. "Will you fly with me?" Sebastian didn't even hesitate. "Of course. I'll call my assistant and have him reschedule all the appointments for next week." Isabella nodded. It was as if autopilot had kicked in, the same mode that had helped her perform the most complicated surgeries in the clinic. No emotions, just a clear plan of action. "I need half an hour to pack," she said. "Then we'll go to the airport. I found out the flight schedule. The next plane leaves in 4 hours. Sebastian looked at his sister carefully. "Are you sure you want to do this right now?" "Absolutely." Isabella turned to her brother. "The longer I wait, the more time they'll have to enjoy a vacation on my money." She went up to the bedroom and pulled out a small suitcase. The movements were crisp, mechanical, put in a few sets of clothes, essentials, documents. Her gaze fell on a photograph on the bedside table. She and Mauricio on vacation in Europe, happy, smiling. Isabella carefully placed the frame face down. When she went downstairs, she found that Sebastian had already ordered a cab and booked tickets for the next flight. His business acumen showed in every situation, which was why they ran the clinic so well together. "The cab will be here in 10 minutes, he informed her. "Are you ready?" Isabella looked around at the house she'd lived in for the past 12 years. Every single thing here held memories of the happy moments of their marriage. Now all those memories seemed fake, like a set in a theater. "Ready," she replied, closing the front door. The night airport greeted them with bright lights and the hum of voices. Isabella walked beside her brother, gripping the handle of her suitcase tightly. Sebastian led her confidently through the crowd to the check-in counter, occasionally holding her elbow as she stiffened, immersed in her thoughts. "2 tickets to Punta Cana for the next flight," Sebastian pronounced as he held out his ID to the airport employee. "Reservation in the name of Montenegro." The young woman behind the counter quickly tapped on the computer keys. "Yes, I see your reservation. Business class seats, leaving in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Do you want to check your luggage?" While Sebastian went through the formalities, Isabella watched the other passengers. Happy families with children, businessmen with leather briefcases, couples in love holding hands. The usual picture of a nighttime airport. I wonder if any of them realize she's flying to destroy someone else's happiness built on her money. Let's go get some coffee, Sebastian suggested as they went through passport control. There's still time before we board. The cafe in the departure area was nearly empty. They took a table by the window that overlooked the lighted airfield. Isabella ordered a green tea. Coffee could finally unhinge her nerves. "Are you sure you don't want to consult a lawyer first?" Sebastian asked cautiously. Isabella shook her head. "No, I want to see everything with my own eyes. I want to look him in the face when he tries to explain why he stole my money." Sebastian nodded understandingly. He knew his sister. If she made a decision, she would follow through. It was a character trait that had helped her become one of the best surgeons in town. "I called my assistant," he said, sipping his espresso. "All appointments have been rescheduled for next week. The clinic will manage without us for a few days." Isabella squeezed her brother's hand gratefully. At times like this, she especially appreciated their closeness. Sebastian didn't ask unnecessary questions, just stood by her side and supported her decisions. The boarding call for their flight was announced. They got up and headed for the gate. Isabella flashed the thought that in the morning she had never imagined that she would be here at the airport, preparing to fly to the Caribbean not for a vacation, but to expose her husband's betrayal. Their seats were next to each other on the airplane. Isabella took the window seat and Sebastian sat next to her, silently handing her the plaid he'd taken from the stewardess. He knew his sister was always cold on airplanes. As the airliner gained altitude, Isabella took out of her purse the notes she had taken during the conversation with the bank employee. She reread them over and over, as if she were trying to find some alternative explanation in the dry facts. $12,000 for tickets and hotel, $5,000 in cash from the safe, $17,000. That was what her blind faith in her husband was worth. "Try to get some sleep," Sebastian advised quietly, taking the papers from her. "It's a long flight, and we'll need our strength there." Isabella leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Sleep was not coming. Memories swirled in her head, how she and Mauricio had met at a charity event where she was representing the clinic. He was just starting his business then, full of enthusiasm and ambition. He charmed her with his confidence and sense of humor. Their wedding was modest. They both wanted to avoid a lavish celebration. Her father approved of her choice, although he warned that the difference in social status could cause problems in the future. Isabella dismissed his words at the time. What difference in status if there is love? The first years of marriage were happy. They supported each other, made plans, traveled. Mauricio was proud of his wife's successes, rejoiced at each of her achievements. And then something changed. His business stopped growing. Several big deals fell through. He became irritable, often talking about the unfairness of life. The stewardess offered them drinks. Isabella asked for water, feeling her throat dry. Sebastian had already dozed off, leaning back in his seat. Outside the window was a vast blackness, occasionally interrupted by a scattering of lights far below. Isabella imagined Mauricio and his companion now, perhaps having dinner at the hotel restaurant or strolling along the beach. She wondered if he even felt guilty about spending her money. She pulled out her phone and opened the bank's app. The transaction history showed that after paying for the tickets and hotel, there was more spending. An expensive restaurant, name-brand boutiques. It looked like Mauricio had decided to give his mistress a luxurious vacation with no expense accounted for. After all, he wasn't paying with his own money. The plane shook slightly as they entered the turbulence zone. Sebastian woke up and looked at his sister. "You still haven't fallen asleep?" "I can't," she admitted. "I keep thinking how I didn't notice it before. I mean, there were signs." "Don't blame yourself." Sebastian straightened in his chair. "You trusted him. That's normal. He's your husband." "Was a husband," Isabella corrected him. "Now he's a thief who stole my money." The flight attendant announced that the plane was beginning its descent. Isabella buckled her seatbelt and straightened the creases in her pants. Even in this situation, she couldn't afford to look sloppy, another trait inherited from her father. The Punta Cana airport greeted them with a wave of humid tropical air. After the air-conditioned airplane, it was a shock, as if they had entered a greenhouse. Isabella took off her jacket and rolled up the sleeves of her blouse. While they waited for their luggage, Sebastian arranged for a cab driver. He agreed to take them directly to the hotel, the name of which Isabella remembered by heart. It had been imprinted in her memory from the moment she'd seen the bank statement. "What's the plan?" Sebastian asked as they got into the cab. Isabella looked at her watch. "It's about 6 in the morning. They're hardly up already. We'll get to the hotel, book a room, and wait for the right time." Sebastian frowned. "You want to take them by surprise?" "Exactly." Isabella's voice held a cold determination. "Let them feel what I felt when I discovered the money was missing." The cab drove down the scenic road along the ocean. In another situation, Isabella would surely have appreciated the beauty of the scenery, the palm trees leaning over the white sand, the azure water, the bright morning sun. But now she saw only the ultimate goal of her journey, a luxury hotel where her husband was enjoying the company of another woman on her dime. The luxury hotel towered like a snow-white hulk against the turquoise sea. Isabella and Sebastian entered the spacious lobby, where the air conditioners created a pleasant coolness after the morning heat. Marble floor, sparkling chandeliers, exotic plants in massive tubs. Everything screamed luxury and big money. The receptionist at the front desk, a young girl with perfect makeup and a flawless smile, greeted them in English with a slight Spanish accent. Sebastian took the lead. "Good morning. We need a room, preferably on the same floor as Suite 412. Isabella noted how professionally her brother held himself. Nothing in his demeanor betrayed the true purpose of their visit. She, on the other hand, tried to keep a low profile, pretending to look at the huge aquarium of tropical fish. "Just a moment," the receptionist tapped on the keyboard. "We have an available suite on the 4th floor. Room 416 at the end of the hallway." "Perfect." Sebastian held out a credit card. "We'll take it." While the paperwork was being processed, Isabella watched the hotel lobby. The guests passed leisurely by, tanned couples in beachwear, families with children heading to breakfast, staff in immaculate uniforms. Somewhere here, in this place of paradise, her husband was enjoying the company of another woman. "Your keys." The receptionist held out 2 electronic cards. "Breakfast is served in the restaurant on the 1st floor until 11 o'clock. The pool and spa are open from 8 in the morning until 10 in the evening. If you need assistance, dial 0 on your room phone." The elevator took them up to the 4th floor. The corridor was carpeted with soft carpeting that muffled their footsteps. Rooms were arranged on either side, with gold license plates on the doors. Isabella counted them down until she stopped at 412. Somewhere behind that door was Mauricio. Their own room turned out to be spacious and elegant. 2 separate bedrooms, a living room overlooking the ocean, a marble bathroom. In other circumstances, Isabella would have appreciated the comfort, but right now her thoughts were preoccupied with other things. "We need to find out their daily routine," she said, taking a seat in a chair by the window. "What time they go out for breakfast, where they go afterward." Sebastian pulled out his phone. "I can go down to the restaurant, observe. It's only 7 in the morning. Most of the guests are still asleep." Isabella nodded. "Good idea. And I'll stay here, keeping an eye on the hallway. They should be out of the room sooner or later." Sebastian left, and Isabella settled down so she could see part of the hallway through the ajar door. She felt like a spy from a cheap detective novel, but right now it was the only way to find out the truth. Time stretched agonizingly slow. At 9 o'clock, a maid walked down the hallway with a cart loaded with clean linens and towels. At 10:30, an elderly couple headed for the elevator, talking softly in German. At 10 o'clock, Sebastian returned. "They haven't been in the restaurant yet," he reported as he closed the door. "I've arranged with the waiter. He'll let me know if they show up." "You gave him a description of Mauricio?" "Yes, and a generous tip for his attentiveness." Sebastian took a seat next to his sister. "Now, all that remains is to wait." Isabella stood up and walked to the window. Below lay a beach of flawless white sand. Loungers were already beginning to fill with vacationers. Lifeguards had taken up their posts, and soft drink vendors were rolling their carts along the water's edge. "You know what the most frustrating thing is?" she said abruptly. "Not the cheating itself. It's the way he planned it. Thought of everything, the card and the cash. Used my trust against myself." Sebastian put a hand on her shoulder. "He'll answer for that. We're not leaving here until he returns every last dime." At 11 o'clock the phone rang. The waiter reported that the guests they were interested in never showed up for breakfast. Isabella began to feel nervous. What if they had already left the hotel? What if the receptionist had warned them? "We should check to see if they're even there," she said, heading for the door. "And how are you going to do that?" Sebastian blocked her path. "Knock and ask?" At that moment, footsteps and a woman's laughter were heard in the hallway. Isabella froze, listening. The sound of an electronic lock, a door opening, and silence again. Number 412 came to life. "They're in there," she whispered, feeling her heart begin to beat faster. "I heard his voice." They spent the next hour working out a plan of action. Sebastian insisted on talking to the hotel management first, possibly involving the police. Isabella wanted an immediate confrontation. "If we go the official route, they'll have time to come up with some explanation," she said. "No, we need to take them by surprise. Let there be no opportunity to dodge or lie." At 1 o'clock, movement was heard again in the room across the hall. The sound of a door opening, footsteps, muffled voices. Isabella reached the door peephole just in time to see Mauricio and a young woman heading for the elevator, both in beach suits with towels over their shoulders. "They went to the pool," she said, turning to her brother. "Now would be a good time to check the room." "Bella, this is an invasion of privacy," Sebastian tried to object. "We can just go down to the pool and what? Make a scene in front of all the guests." Isabella shook her head. "No, I want to see how they live on my money first. I want to know the whole truth." They went down to the first floor and approached the receptionist's desk. This time there was a young man on duty there. Isabella turned on all her charm. "Excuse me, my husband is staying in room 412, but he's not answering his phone. I'm worried that something may have happened to him. Could you please open the room?" The receptionist hesitated. "I need to check the registration details." "Of course." Isabella held out her ID card. "I am Isabella Montenegro. The room was paid for with my bank card." The verification took a few minutes. The receptionist verified that the payment had indeed gone through her card and called a security officer to escort them to the suite. Once inside the suite, Isabella felt everything squeeze inside. Things were strewn everywhere, expensive dresses she'd never seen, Mauricio's men's shirts, cosmetics on the dressing table. There was a half-empty bottle of champagne and 2 glasses on the bedside table. Despite the working air conditioners, the room was stuffy. Isabella walked slowly around the spacious room, noting every detail. Expensive purchases from local boutiques were still in branded bags, price tags still on. On the dressing table was a new perfume, the same unfamiliar scent she'd smelled the morning before her husband left. Sebastian stood at the door, hesitant to go deeper into the room. "Bella, maybe we shouldn't—" "It is worth it," her voice sounded unnaturally calm. "I want to know exactly what my money was spent on." She opened her closet. Inside hung summer dresses, swimsuits, beach tunics. Judging by the size, his companion was considerably younger. All the clothes were small sizes, screaming colors. Mauricio's shirts hung neatly nearby, the same ones she had ironed at home. In the bathroom was a collection of luxury cosmetics, obviously recently purchased. Isabella picked up a bottle of cream. The price on it was more than a nurse's monthly salary at their clinic. On a shelf lay Mauricio's men's razor, the exact same one that stood in their home bathroom. They should be back soon, Sebastian reminded him. We'd better go. Isabella shook her head. No, I want to wait for them here. Let them explain everything right now. She lowered herself into a chair standing in the corner of the room. Sebastian, realizing it was useless to argue, took a position by the window. Time stretched agonizingly slow. From the open balcony came the voices of vacationers, the sound of the surf, the music from the pool. After about an hour, the key turned in the lock. The door opened, letting in a laughing couple. Mauricio was saying something, and his companion, a young woman with a perfect figure and long blonde hair, was laughing with her hand on his shoulder. Both were in bathing suits, with hair damp from the pool. They didn't notice the presence of strangers right away. Mauricio was the first to see Isabella in the chair and froze in place. His face instantly paled. The hand that held the beach towel drooped listlessly. Isabella. His voice sounded hoarse, as if he was short of breath. The young woman stopped laughing and incomprehensibly shifted her gaze from Mauricio to Isabella. She looked surprised, but not frightened. She didn't seem to know who was in front of her. Isabella rose slowly from her chair. Her movements were calm, almost mechanical. 15 years of surgical practice had taught her to keep her composure in any situation. "Didn't expect to see me?" she asked, looking straight into her husband's eyes. "Did you think I wouldn't notice $17,000 missing?" The young woman turned sharply to Mauricio. "What's going on? Who are these people?" "Paulina, wait," Mauricio began, but Isabella interrupted him. "I'm his wife. And this," she circled the room with her hand, "is paid for from my bank card, which he stole." Paulina recoiled from Mauricio, her face contorted with a mixture of surprise and indignation. "Wife? You said you were divorced, that all that money was yours." "I can explain everything." Mauricio took a step forward, but Sebastian blocked his path. "Stay where you are," his voice sounded threatening. "You've said enough already." Isabella walked over to the dressing table and picked up a receipt from the boutique. $800 dress, perfume for $300, jewelry, cosmetics. "You've done well for your new friend, Mauricio. Too bad it wasn't with your own money." "Look, I was going to return," Mauricio began, but hesitated under her gaze. "Return it?" Isabella grinned. "How? Your firm is on the verge of bankruptcy. You don't have that kind of money." Paulina, still standing in her swimsuit in the middle of the room, suddenly exploded. "So that's why you wouldn't let me post pictures of us on social media. Not because you care about privacy, but because you're a liar and a thief." She rushed to the closet and started pulling things out of there. "All of this was bought with stolen money? Fine. You can have it all back." "Paulina, calm down," Mauricio tried to stop her, but she pushed his hand away. "Don't you dare touch me. You used me, made me an accessory to your crime. I work in real estate. I have a reputation. If this gets out—" "No one will find out," Isabella interjected. "If you pack your things right now and leave." Paulina froze, still holding the pile of clothes in her hands. "You won't report it to the police?" "That depends on how fast you disappear and how quiet you are," Isabella replied. The young woman needed no further persuasion. She grabbed her bag, tossed the essentials into it, and headed for the door without even changing her clothes. "Wait," Isabella called out to her. "Leave the jewelry too." Paulina looked at her defiantly, but then still took off the bracelet and earrings Mauricio had bought her and placed them on the table. A moment later, the door slammed shut behind her. There was a heavy silence in the room. Mauricio stood with his head down, still in his wet swim shorts, water dripping onto the carpet. Isabella looked at him and didn't recognize the man she'd lived with for 15 years. "I'm calling the police," she said, pulling out her cell phone. Mauricio twitched. "No, please. I'll find a way to get the money back." "How?" Isabella looked at him with disdain. "By stealing from someone else? I have assets, stakes in projects." He spoke quickly, confused. "Give me a chance to make things right." "Assets?" Isabella grinned bitterly. "You mean that loss-making firm that's kept afloat only because of my money?" Sebastian, who had been silently observing the scene until that moment, stepped forward. "I think we should go down to the front desk and call the police there. Let the hotel management be aware of what's going on as well." Mauricio turned even whiter. "No, please. This will destroy me. I have a business, a reputation." "You should have thought of that when you were stealing my money," Isabella retorted. "Come on, Sebastian." They headed for the door. Mauricio, in desperation, grabbed Isabella's arm. "Wait, I'll do anything you say. Just don't get the police." Isabella released her hand and looked at the man she had once loved. In front of her now stood a pathetic, frightened man willing to do anything to avoid responsibility for his actions. The hotel lobby was filled with tense silence as Isabella, Sebastian, and Mauricio went downstairs. A few guests watched the strange procession with curiosity, a drenched man in beach clothes and two impeccably dressed men who led him under their arms like escorts. The receptionist behind the counter immediately realized that something serious was going on. He picked up the internal phone, summoning the hotel manager. A few minutes later, a trim, middle-aged man in an expensive suit appeared in the lobby. "I'm Ricardo Mendoza, the hotel manager," he introduced himself, assessing the situation with a professional eye. "What can I do for you?" Isabella stepped forward. "I need to contact the local police. This man," she pointed to Mauricio, "stole my bank card and a substantial amount of cash to pay for his stay at your hotel." The manager's face took on a concerned expression. "Come into my office. This is not the place to discuss such matters in the lobby." The manager's office was located in a quiet part of the first floor. The room was tastefully decorated, dark wood, leather furniture, dim lighting. On the walls hung photographs of the hotel at different periods of its history. "Have a seat," Mendoza pointed to the chairs. "I'll contact the police immediately." Mauricio, still in wet shorts, shrank back in his chair. "Isabella, please let's settle this amongst ourselves." "Between ourselves?" She turned to him. "How do you propose to resolve this? Maybe steal from someone else to pay me back?" The manager spoke quickly and quietly on the phone. 15 minutes later, two police officers, a man and a woman in uniform, entered the office. The female officer introduced herself as Detective Ramirez. "Señora Montenegro," she addressed Isabella, "please tell me what happened." Isabella began to speak, clearly, matter-of-factly, as she was accustomed to presenting information at the clinic. She told of the missing card, the call to the bank, the money taken from the safe. The detective recorded the statement, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Do you have documentation of the transactions?" Ramirez asked. "Yes." Isabella pulled out her phone and showed a statement from a banking app. "Here are the ticket payments and hotel reservations. And here are checks for purchases at local stores." Mauricio sat with his head down. His hair was almost dry, but his swim shorts still left damp marks on the leather chair. He looked 10 years older. The second policeman, meanwhile, was examining Mauricio's papers. "Señor Rivera, do you admit to taking your wife's bank card without her knowledge?" "I was going to return the money," Mauricio muttered. "It was a momentary weakness." "A momentary weakness for $17,000, Sebastian interjected. "And how long have you been planning this trip?" Detective Ramirez raised her hand, stopping the altercation. Senor Rivera, stealing a bank card and using it without the owner's permission is a serious offense. So is stealing cash. You'll have to come with us to the station to testify. Mauricio turned even paler. But I'm her husband. How can this be considered theft? Marital status doesn't give you the right to handle someone else's finances without authorization, Ramirez replied, especially when we're talking about a corporate card tied to a business account. Isabella watched as the police officers handcuffed Mauricio. Her husband didn't even resist. He just seemed to give up. 15 years of marriage was ending at the police station in the resort town. Senora Montenegro, Detective Ramirez turned to her. We'll need your official statement. Can you come with us? Isabella nodded. Of course, my brother will ride with me. The police station was located a few blocks from the hotel. It was a small two-story building painted a light yellow color. Inside was the usual atmosphere for such places. Police officers at their computers, phones ringing, papers rustling. Mauricio was taken to a separate room for questioning. Isabella and Sebastian were escorted into Detective Ramirez's office. It was cool with the air conditioning running, and on the desk was a photograph of a smiling family, apparently Ramirez herself. It was beginning to get dark outside the window. The tropical twilight came quickly, turning the sky into a dark blue dome. The lights in the office were turned on, giving Isabella a headache. One last question, Detective Ramirez said. Are you ready to formally charge your husband? Isabella closed her eyes for a moment. Pictures of their life together, the wedding, the purchase of the house, the holidays together, the traveling, flashed before her mind's eye. It all seemed so distant and unreal now. Yes, she answered firmly. I want to press charges. The interrogation room was cool from the air conditioner running at full blast. Mauricio sat at a metal table, still in the beachwear he hadn't even been given a change of clothes. Across from him sat Detective Ramirez, a folder of documents in front of her and a recorder running. So, Senor Rivera, she began, looking through the papers, tell us exactly how you took possession of your wife's bank card. Mauricio ran a hand over his face. He had aged about 10 years in the last few hours, dark circles under his eyes and stubble on his cheeks. I knew where she kept the spare card, his voice sounded hoarse. In the safe, in the home office. I peeked at the PIN number when she was paying at a restaurant one day. And when did you take the card? The day before I left. Isabella was at work, at the clinic. I purposely picked a time when I knew for sure she was busy with a complicated surgery. The detective made a note in her notebook. And the cash, the $5,000. They were in the same place, in the safe. Mauricio lowered his eyes. Isabella withdrew them to pay for some medical equipment. A second policeman entered the room, bringing printouts of bank transactions. Detective Ramirez looked them over carefully, underlining something with a pen. It says here that you spent significant amounts at local stores. She looked up at Mauricio. Expensive clothes, jewelry, cosmetics, all of this was for your companion. Mauricio nodded. I wanted to make her feel good. Paulina. She is young, beautiful. Next to her, I felt like a different person. A different person? The detective interjected. You mean not a bankrupt man who steals money from his own wife? Mauricio flinched at those words. My business is going through temporary difficulties. I was going to pay back all the money once I closed some big deals. According to our records, the detective checked the paperwork. Your real estate agency is on the verge of bankruptcy. For the past 2 years, you've existed only because of your wife's financial support. Is that correct? The market is tough right now. Mauricio tried to adopt a business-like tone. But I have promising projects. If Isabella would just give me some time. Time for what? The detective interrupted him. To keep spending her money on a young mistress? At that moment, the door opened and a man in a strict suit entered the room. "I apologize for being late. I am Senor Rivera's attorney." Detective Ramirez nodded. "We are just discussing the circumstances of the theft." "My client is willing to make full restitution," the attorney stated, taking a seat next to Mauricio. "This is about a family conflict that can be resolved peacefully." "A family conflict?" The detective raised an eyebrow. "Stealing a bank card and a large sum of cash is a felony, regardless of the family ties between the perpetrator and the victim." Mauricio shifted his gaze from the lawyer to the detective. "Look, I admit I made a mistake, but I'm not some street thief. I'm a successful businessman." "A former successful businessman," the detective corrected him. "You're now a suspect in a burglary and bank card fraud case." Isabella leaned tiredly against the wall. The events of the last 24 hours seemed unreal, as if she was in someone else's life. Yesterday morning she had had breakfast with her husband at their home, and now she was sitting in the police station of a resort town, testifying against him. Mauricio's lawyer came out of the interrogation room. "Senora Montenegro, my client would like to speak with you, in private." Isabella glanced over to her brother. Sebastian shook his head. "No need. Let it be resolved officially." But Isabella had already made up her mind. "No, I want to hear what he has to say." She entered the interrogation room. Mauricio was sitting hunched over a desk. He raised his head at her appearance, desperation red in his eyes. "Bella," he began quietly, "I'm sorry. I know I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" She sat down across from him. "A mistake is when you accidentally take the wrong card from your wallet, and you purposely stole money, planned a trip, made up a story for your mistress." "I'm confused," his voice shook. "The last few years have been so hard. You've been getting more and more successful, and I felt like a total failure. When Paulina showed up, she looked at me like I still meant something. And you decided to prove your worth to her at my expense?" Isabella spoke calmly, but each word struck like a whip. "Buy her admiration with my money?" Mauricio cringed in his chair. "I didn't think it would turn out this way. I was going to return the money before you noticed it was missing." "And if I hadn't noticed?" Isabella pitched forward. "Would you have kept seeing her, keep stealing?" He remained silent, lowering his eyes. That silent answer told Isabella more than any words could. The man she had trusted for 15 years was incapable of even honestly admitting his intentions. A tropical evening had descended on the city, bringing with it a relative coolness. The police station was getting quieter as the day shift ended and the officers went home. Isabella sat in Detective Ramirez's office, thinking about her next move. Sebastian returned with a cup of coffee for his sister. His lawyer wants to discuss the terms of the deal. Isabella took the cup, feeling the aroma of fresh coffee clear her thoughts a little. "What terms are they offering?" "None so far. They're waiting for our offers." Sebastian took a seat on the edge of the table. "Mauricio is desperate. He realizes that if this goes to trial, his reputation is over." Isabella took a sip of coffee. A plan was slowly forming in her head. "His reputation is already ruined, but he still has a firm." "A loss-making firm," Sebastian reminded her. "Not exactly." Isabella set her cup down. "He has stakes in several construction projects. If you sell them now, you could get enough to cover the amount stolen." At that moment, Detective Ramirez entered the office. "Senora Montenegro, your husband's attorney insists on seeing you. Are you ready to receive him?" Isabella nodded. "Yes, and I have a specific proposal." Mauricio's lawyer, a trim, middle-aged man in an impeccable suit, entered the office with a businesslike appearance. He was clearly accustomed to dealing with difficult situations and was now preparing for serious negotiations. "Senora Montenegro," he began, settling into a chair. My client is deeply remorseful for what he has done and is willing to discuss compensation for damages. Compensation? Isabella raised an eyebrow. What exactly is he going to compensate for the money he stole? His firm is on the verge of bankruptcy. The lawyer pulled a file folder from his briefcase. Senor Rivera has assets, stakes in several promising projects. I know about these projects, Isabella interrupted him, and I know their real value. Here's my proposal. Mauricio transfers all his shares in the construction projects to me and hands over full control of the real estate agency. The lawyer frowned. Those are too harsh terms. In fact, you are demanding that he give up his business. From a business that has existed for the last 2 years only because of my money, Isabella reminded him. If he agrees to those terms, I withdraw the police report. If not, the case goes to court. I need to discuss this with my client. The lawyer rose. You have 1 hour. Isabella looked at her watch. After that, I'm flying home and all negotiations will be handled through my attorney. As the lawyer walked out, Sebastian turned to his sister. Are you sure you want to take his business? I mean, he's practically bankrupt. It's not about the money, Isabella shook her head. I want him to lose everything he has, to be reminded of his betrayal every time he tries to start something new. Sebastian nodded understandingly. He knew his sister. Behind the outward calmness lurked an iron determination. If she was determined to punish her husband, she would do it as effectively as possible. Half an hour later, the lawyer returned with Mauricio. He looked haggard, wrinkled clothes, red eyes, disheveled hair. There was no trace of his usual self-confidence. I agree, he said quietly, but I have one condition. Isabella looked at him expectantly. I want you to keep my employees' jobs, Mauricio continued. They are not to blame for my mistakes. It was an unexpected request. Isabella looked at her husband carefully. Perhaps there was something human left in him after all. Very well, she agreed. I'll keep the staff, but my people will run the agency. They spent the next hour drawing up the necessary paperwork. The lawyer prepared the business transfer agreement. Detective Ramirez helped draft the statement of withdrawal of charges. Mauricio signed the papers with a trembling hand, losing a piece of his former life with each signature. What are you going to do now? Isabella asked when all the formalities were completed. Mauricio shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. Maybe I'll go to another city, start over again. With no money, no connections, no reputation. There was no gloating in Isabella's voice, only cold interest. I have no choice, he looked up at her. I ruined everything with my own hands. Now I have to live with it. Detective Ramirez approached them with the latest paperwork. Senor Rivera is free to go, but I strongly advise you not to show up in our town again. Mauricio nodded. He looked like a man who had lost not only his business and reputation, but a part of himself. His shoulders slumped and there was a hollowness in his eyes. Goodbye, Isabella, he said quietly. I hope someday you can forgive me. To forgive is not to forget, she answered. And I won't forget. Mauricio walked slowly out of the study. A few minutes later, they heard a cab start up in the courtyard of the police station. Isabella went to the window. The car was taking her ex-husband away to an unknown destination. You did the right thing, Sebastian said, putting his hand on her shoulder. He deserved it. Isabella nodded silently. There was an emptiness inside, not pain, not anger, just emptiness. 15 years together ended in the police station in the resort town, amidst the business transfer papers and withdrawn charges. Detective Ramirez gathered all the paperwork into a folder. Senora Montenegro, you'll need a copy of these papers for your attorney back home. Yes, thank you, Isabella turned to her. I appreciate your help. It's my job, the detective smiled. I hope next time you'll come to our place just to relax. Isabella smiled weakly in response. The thought of rest seemed absurd now. She had to go home and deal with the fallout from this story, Mauricio's business, their shared property, the inevitable gossip and questions. In her hotel room, Isabella methodically packed her things. Every movement was precise, deliberate. A surgeon's habit of neatness was evident even in such simple actions. Sebastian sat in a chair, finishing a conversation with an assistant from the clinic. "Yes, we're flying out tonight," he spoke into the phone. "Get all the paperwork ready on Mauricio's transactions. We'll need a full audit of his business." Isabella zipped up her suitcase and walked to the window. The beach spread out below, where vacationers were enjoying the last hours of afternoon sunshine. This piece of paradise would forever be etched in her memory as the place where her marriage had crumbled. There was a knock at the door. It was the hotel receptionist with an envelope in his hands. "Senora Montenegro, the papers from the police have arrived. Detective Ramirez asked me to give them to you personally." Isabella took the envelope. Inside were copies of all the papers, the statement of denial of charges, the business transfer agreement, Paulina's testimony. The last document caught her attention. The young woman described in detail how Mauricio had planned their vacation together, how he had assured her of his financial solvency. "The cab will be here in 20 minutes, Sebastian informed her, ending the conversation. "Are you ready?" Isabella nodded, tucking her papers into her bag. "Yes, just need to pay for the room." They were met at reception by the hotel manager himself, Ricardo Mendoza. He looked genuinely upset. "Senora Montenegro, let me apologize for everything that happened at our hotel. We are refunding the full cost of the stay." "That won't be necessary," Isabella shook her head. "You and your staff have been invaluable to us." Mendoza insisted. "However, I would like to make amends for the unpleasant experience. Next time you decide to visit our resort, we will provide you with a better room and full service at the hotel's expense." Isabella smiled politely, realizing it was unlikely she would ever return here. Too many unpleasant memories would be associated with this place. The cab drove through the evening city, past brightly lit stores and restaurants. Somewhere here, in one of these establishments, Mauricio was spending her money trying to impress her young mistress. The thought no longer caused pain, only weariness and slight contempt. The airport was not crowded. They checked in quickly and found themselves in the waiting area. Sebastian went to buy water, leaving his sister alone with her thoughts. Isabella pulled out her phone and opened the banking app. She needed to block all the cards Mauricio had, change passwords, cancel his access to joint accounts. She methodically performed these steps as if she were cutting her husband out of her financial life. "Your ticket," Sebastian returned and handed her a boarding pass along with a bottle of water. "We have business class seats. You can rest during the flight." Isabella nodded gratefully. It was only now that she felt how tired she'd been over the past 2 days, physically and emotionally. Boarding for their flight was announced. As they walked up the ramp, Isabella took one last look at the lights of the resort town. Here remained a part of her life, 15 years of illusions about a happy marriage, a faithful husband, a future together. On the airplane, she took her seat by the window. Sebastian settled next to her, pulling out his work tablet. Even now he was still attending to the business of the clinic. "You know," he said, without taking his eyes off the screen, "maybe it's for the best that it all unfolded this way." Isabella turned to her brother. "What do you mean?" "If it wasn't for that theft, you could still be living a long time with a man who doesn't appreciate you." Sebastian set the clipboard aside. "You're free now. You can start over." Isabella pondered his words. Really, hadn't there been signs before? Mauricio's constant dissatisfaction with her progress, his envy of her accomplishments, the petty lies she preferred not to notice. The airplane began to accelerate down the runway. Isabella leaned back in her seat, watching the lights of the city gradually turn into a scattering of distant dots. There was a long flight ahead and an even longer process of rebuilding her life. "What do you plan to do with his agency?" Sebastian asked as the plane gained altitude. "Do a full audit," Isabella replied. "See what we can salvage. Maybe merge with some successful agency." "And the staff? You promised to keep the jobs." "And I will keep that promise." Isabella pulled some paperwork out of her bag. "But every employee will be thoroughly vetted. I don't want to take any chances." Sebastian smiled. "I recognize my sister, always keeping your word even if it's given to an unworthy person." Sebastian soon dozed off and she continued to stare out the porthole. The plane flew through the night, taking her farther and farther away from the place of betrayal. Ahead of her was their city, the clinic, her familiar work, all the things that had given her strength and confidence. That confidence was even stronger now. She had been through the betrayal and emerged victorious. Isabella closed her eyes, but not to sleep. She began to mentally make a plan of action for the next few days. She would need to meet with the lawyers, check all the joint assets, start the process of reorganizing the real estate agency. Work had always been her best medicine, and now she was going to dive into it head first. Sebastian, her faithful brother and partner, who had not hesitated to drop everything and fly with her to the end of the world to support her in her hour of need, was sleeping quietly beside her. She was grateful to fate that she had at least one really close person in her life.